Hey, so I got caught up on a little bit of a hype train this month, and I read All Fours by Miranda July, and I have some thoughts about it. This is The Rhetorical Reader. I'm Michael. Let's talk about the book. So, I've never been one to bury the lead, so I want to start by just saying that this is a 4 out of 5 read for me. It was powerful, it was emotional, and I would full throatedly recommend it to anyone. So, with all that said, why was it not a 5-star for me? We'll get to that. I want to start with a brief synopsis of the book, spoiler free, and then talk about some of the things that I really loved, read you some quotes, really get into the language of the book. Then I'll talk about some of the things that I didn't like as much, why it wasn't a 5-star for me, and then we'll wrap it up with some final thoughts that I want to just talk about in general with books like this. So, the synopsis of the book, without any spoilers, this book follows a 45-year-old woman who is an artist, a mother, and a wife, and she is successful, but she's not really happy with the life that she's living, and she doesn't know why. She doesn't understand exactly what's wrong in her life. She doesn't understand exactly what's missing. She just has this vague longing inside of her that's kind of eating her up. So when she comes into some money from a licensing fee from an old project that she did, it's decided that she's going to spend that money by taking a cross-country trip to New York, spending a week there, meeting up with some old friends, doing some work, that kind of thing. But due to circumstances that play into why she's feeling so confused about her life, she decides that instead of flying across country and just being there in New York because she lives in LA, she decides that she's going to drive cross country to do this and have all of these experiences along the way. But that never happens. Instead, she gets about 30 minutes from home and she arrives in a town on the outskirts of LA. And I want to say I know nothing about the geography around that area, so I don't really want to. It kind of will spoil the illusion for me if I really understand how these things are connected. But she arrives in this small town, and rather than ever leaving, she ends up checking into a motel, and then she spends her entire New York trip just there in this motel room where she spends all of the trip money redecorating it in a lavish fashion and debates whether or not she's going off the deep end. There's a man involved. There's a lot of strangeness that happens, and that's really only the first part of the book. I don't want to go any further than that because the next part, where it really gets into the meat of the book, is her life after this trip and the things that she does and the decisions that she makes. So you just have a woman, middle-aged, finding herself at kind of a crossroads in her life. And an interview that I watched with Miranda July, she talks about how this is a coming-of-age story for middle age, and I think that is a incredibly strong description of what's going on in this book. So that's all I can really say without diving into spoilers. So what are the things that I loved about this book, and why was it so emotionally powerful? So first of all, I think that it really is an examination of the difficulty of reaching middle age and realizing that you're now an adult on the back half of your life, but maybe you still have no idea how you're supposed to live it. And there's a very powerful quote early in the book that I wanted to share. And she talks about the different parts of her life in this. And she says, 20 years ago, I'd been in my 20s. 20 years from now, I'd be in my 60s. I was no closer to being 65 than 25, but since time moved forward, not backward, 65 was tomorrow and 25 was moot. I didn't think a lot about death, but I was getting ready to. I understood that death was coming and that all my current preoccupations were kind of naive. I still operated as if I could win somehow. Not in the vast and total winning I had hoped for in the previous decades, but a last chance to get it together before winter came. My final season. And I just found that quote absurdly powerful because I am kind of sharing that same part of life with the character in this book. And so I'm not a woman, I'm not a mother. I don't go through some of the same things that this woman experiences in this book, but the conversation about being in middle age and being dissatisfied with one's life, being disconnected from one's life, which is something I think that this character really is so incredibly powerful. And there's so many wonderful revelations and examinations of that stage of life in this book that it makes it very overwhelming sometimes to read if you're experiencing it right alongside this woman. I think another thing that she says that I found really disturbing, she's talking about a woman who's older than her who gives her sort of a coy look. And she says, "It was strange to see that sort of impish look on an older face. I made a mental note to stop looking coy in the next 3 to 5 years." And I was just blown away by that because so many times when I look at myself in the mirror or when I think about where I am in my life, I think about things that I do or do not or should not do anymore. And so just the way she's living inside of her head and really trying to figure out who she's allowed to be at this age is just, it's just stunning. So the language is incredibly powerful. The writing is exceptional. Just those two quotes are just a very simple, statement of that. But I think Miranda July absolutely knew what she wanted this book to accomplish. She absolutely knew the message that she was trying to convey, and she had it deep in her heart, and she poured it all out into this book. And it's just, I think I've said this already, but it's overwhelming at times how on the nose and painful some of the things that this character goes through are. And you as the reader are brought right inside of her head when you experience them. One last quote that I wanted to talk about with aging. She says, "There was no collective tipping point. Most of us wouldn't do anything very different ever. Our yearning and quiet rage would be suppressed and seep into our children, and they would hate this about us enough to do it a new way." And I don't have children. I don't ever think I will. But her child is a very big part of the difficulties that she's having in her life and the disconnects that she's feeling because she struggles with being a part of her family. She struggles with being connected to her family. Later in the book, there's one final quote that I want to touch on that really shows the examination of that lost feeling of middle age. And I have so many things underlined. I have so many passages that I will just revisit from this book over and over again. But this is the last one I want to share with you. She's upset about something that's happened in this stage of the book. And she says, "I had entirely misunderstood the assignment, the scale of what life asked of us. I'd only been living second to second, just coping this whole time, white knuckling it until the next shared dream, emergency, premiere. And in between these, I'd whipped myself into a froth of longing, or worked, created fictions. My conversations with God, even God was in on this. Was there any actual enchantment, or was it all just survival, ways to muddle through?" And that attitude that pervades this whole book of her froth of longing and the way that she's trying to find a way back to a life that feels like it belongs to her, that she feels comfortable inside of. It hit me so hard that I took a couple days off after finishing the book to try to just wrap my head around how hard it had hit. And I'm still sort of reeling from the power that this book has in its examinations of life. So I don't know if I get a good job of articulating that, but that is a sense of why I found this book so powerful, and why the writing was so powerful. But what were some of the things that I didn't love? What kept this book, with all that I've just said, what kept this from being a 5-star for me? And one of the things that did that was that I found the choice of main character, the choice of viewpoint character, somewhat odd, because this woman is a artist, and she's at least moderately successful. She's recognizable, and she has a husband who is a music producer who is also quite successful. They are very wealthy, maybe not upper echelon rich, but they have those kinds of creative LA parties where everyone comes to visit, and they have the kind of lifestyle where when she comes into a windfall of $20,000, they think absolutely nothing of her just blowing that on a cross-country trip with no concerns about where that money goes at all. And they have a nanny that takes care of their child part-time for them. The main character has a full-time assistant who she works with for her business interests. So I'm not going to say, I don't know if you can hear my cat. She's trying to get my attention right now. That was quite plaintive. But the character is no less allowed to feel these things because of her social position. But the reason why it disturbed me, and the reason why it distracted me sometimes, is because so much of this book relies on the fact that she doesn't have anything that requires her to be super present in her life, in the sense that she can just take off and leave for 3 weeks if she's not working on a specific project, because she doesn't have a normal schedule. She doesn't live a life bound by time clocks. She has good health care. She has plenty of friends and a strong support network. She has money enough that she can just waste it. So, or spend it frivolously. Let's not say waste. And for so many people who might be at this stage of their life, that's not a person that they can relate to. So many people, I mean, I'd be fascinated to see this book written again, but from the point of view of a 45-year-old single mother who's working 3 jobs just to keep her kids in clothes and food and going to school. And I pick that specific example because that was my own mother when I was in middle school and high school. And so I saw her experience with going through middle age from a child's point of view, of course, but her experience of that as someone who was desperately just trying to make ends meet. And so I found the main character someone that it was not hard to stay in touch with in terms of her emotions and the things that she was feeling, but I found it very hard to empathize with the kind of life that she lives, or to put myself in her shoes, because it's so outside of the reality of so many people. The other thing that detracted from the book a little bit for me is very specifically the ending. And again, no spoilers, but the ending is very pat, very rushed in a way that I was surprised by. And rushed isn't even fair. I don't think I want to say rushed. I think I want to say it was brought to a conclusion after everything that had been the buildup in this book. Everything was just sort of resolved very quietly in a few pages and a few statements, just sort of bringing everything to an end in a way that personally I didn't find as satisfying as the rest of the experience of this novel. But that's a minor criticism. It's personal. Other people might feel completely differently about how the book ends. So just take that as you will. So those are the only things that I didn't love as much about this book. Like I said, it's still solidly a 4-star, and I would still solidly recommend it. And I think that that gets to the heart of this last thing that I want to say, which is, I mentioned, I'm obviously not capable of understanding some of the things that this woman goes through, being a woman and a wife and a mother. But I think that it's really important to sometimes read books where you aren't the target audience, where you aren't the person that the book is being written to. Because in great stories, and don't get me wrong, this is a great novel, but in great stories, there are universal things that you can take away from them, whether you're the target audience or not. And for me, this rumination on middle age and this argument with herself about the distance that she feels from her own life were so incredibly powerful. But beyond that, I think it's also really important to read books that are not written for you, because you get to live inside of the head of someone who has experiences that you might never really see or understand in your own life. And so going along on this journey with her and seeing her navigate the changes that happen in her life throughout this, through the lens of a wife and a mother and a middle-aged woman, were interesting to me beyond my own sphere of understanding, because I will never experience those things. So it's important to see them and to find a way to understand and have empathy for people who are experiencing life through different lenses. So I found that part of it to be very powerful as well, and it meant a lot to me to come along on that journey. I don't think that I need to dive in too much more than this. I think that I've said everything I wanted to say. I'll just leave off with this. This book is incredibly powerful. It left me with a deep emotional hangover. And even though there were things that were not perfect, even though there were things that didn't line up exactly for me to make this a 5-star read, it was stunningly good. And Miranda July, on one example only, I want to say that she is an amazing author, and I think I'm going to have to read more of her work, because this was so effective and so emotional of a journey for me to go on with her. So again, I highly recommend it. That is All Fours by Miranda July. It was published just in May of this year, so it's everywhere right now. And yeah, it's exceptional. I highly recommend. Thank you for watching, and if you've read it, if you had thoughts about it, if you'd like to share them, please do so in the comments, and I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.